In the chill of a London night, a solitary figure moves through the fog, his shoes tapping softly on wet cobblestones, his coat collar turned high against the wind. He looks like a man with somewhere important to be, yet no one knows his name. His name was John Bingham, a nobleman, an MI5 officer, and the man who quietly taught the world what it truly meant to live a double life. While the world adored James Bond, the real spy who inspired him preferred silence to glory. For decades, his story remained locked inside government vaults. His face never appeared on posters, his voice never reached the public. But those who knew whispered about him, the gentleman who embodied everything Bond was meant to be. Yet nothing Bond ever became. He gave the world its greatest spy, and in return, the world forgot he ever existed. This is the untold story of the man behind the myth, the real spy they erased. Before the tuxedos, martinis, and Aston Martins, there was John Bingham, the quiet aristocrat whose life unfolded far from the silver screen. Born into privilege, yet bound by duty, he lived in a Britain rebuilding itself after war, where loyalty meant secrecy and silence was survival. Educated at Eton and Cambridge, Bingham seemed destined for politics or diplomacy. Instead, he chose the shadows. When World War II broke out, he joined MI5, not for adventure, but for a sense of moral purpose. He hunted traitors in London's fog, where lies and loyalty blurred together. Among his peers in those smoke-filled offices was a naval officer with a taste for danger, Ian Fleming. Fleming admired Bingham's restraint, his ability to navigate deceit with elegance. When he later wrote Casino Royale, fragments of Bingham's composure, intellect, and subtle darkness became the DNA of James Bond. Yet as Bond became an icon, Bingham faded into anonymity. The man who inspired the legend could never reveal his truth, bound by the same silence that defined his life. The world celebrated the fantasy, but forgot the man who made it possible. What was hidden behind that silence? And why was the real spy erased from his own story? John Bingham's beginnings were written in refinement, not rebellion. Born in 1908, heir to the title Baron Clanmorris, he grew up in a world that prized decorum over desire. But beneath the polished manners was a mind drawn to mystery, fascinated by the hidden workings of people and power. After Cambridge, Bingham entered journalism briefly before the war redirected his path. When Britain trembled under air raids, he was recruited into MI5, where his patience and analytical calm stood out. He wasn't the kind of agent who chased gunfire, his battleground was the human mind. In the quiet corridors of wartime intelligence, Bingham learned to move unseen, to blend civility with cunning. His aristocratic charm disarmed enemies. His curiosity unmasked spies. He became known as the gentleman interrogator, feared not for his threats, but for his unsettling understanding of guilt. By the war's end, his name carried weight within MI5, a man of grace who never raised his voice, but whose judgment shaped critical operations. He found his place not in fame, but in function, the shadow behind security, the unseen guardian of a fragile peace. He had no idea that his calm, demeanor, and moral gravity would soon echo through fiction, reshaped into a figure the world would never forget. When peace returned to Britain, the guns fell silent, but John Bingham's war never truly ended. He remained inside MI5, navigating the fragile balance between truth and illusion. The Cold War demanded loyalty, and Bingham offered his completely, even as it began to isolate him. Then came the moment that changed everything. Ian Fleming, his former colleague, published Casino Royale. The world met James Bond, a figure of confidence, wit, and controlled danger. Bingham recognized the reflection immediately. The poise, the reserve, the charm that masked calculation. It was him, and yet, not him at all. Bond's world was filled with glamour and violence. Bingham's was built on restraint and moral weight. He found the caricature unsettling. The man he had been quiet, reflective, measured, had become a fantasy for millions. Offers of interviews followed, but Bingham turned them all down. He declined photographs, shunned recognition, and withdrew deeper into the quiet rhythms of his writing desk. He once remarked to a friend, "Fiction can afford to be loud, truth must stay silent." But that silence came at a cost. As Bond's fame grew, the public no longer remembered the man who had sparked the idea. The myth consumed its maker. And Bingham, ever loyal to secrecy, watched as his likeness was rewritten into something he no longer recognized. By the late 1960 seconds, John Bingham had withdrawn from the circles that once defined him. The Cold War was reshaping the world of espionage, new technology, new politics, new faces. The gentleman spy was becoming obsolete. What had once been an art of subtlety was turning into a trade of surveillance and control. Bingham retired from active duty, turning to fiction to preserve the world he knew, a quieter, more human form of espionage. His novels, such as My Name is Michael Sibley and Five Roundabouts to Heaven, revealed the emotional weight of deceit, the guilt, the fatigue, the moral decay that no gadget could disguise. But the public didn't want truth. They wanted Bond, fast cars, danger, seduction. Fleming's myth had swallowed the reality whole. Bingham's book sold modestly, his name fading into literary footnotes while 007 became immortal. There was a quiet sorrow in his later years. Those who visited him noticed how he kept Bond out of conversation, as if even mentioning it might reopen an old wound. He lived surrounded by books and silence, the life of a man who had given the world its fantasy but could not share in its applause. Once, when asked if he resented Fleming's fame, Bingham smiled faintly and said, "I suppose every spy must learn to disappear. Some of us simply do it better than others." It was an answer as elegant and as tragic as the man himself. Time moved gently around John Bingham, but he seemed untouched by it, still the reserved gentleman, still the man who carried secrets he would never tell. The noise of modern Britain grew louder, yet he remained a figure of quiet precision, writing and reflecting in the same measured tones that had once guided MI5. He refused to chase recognition. When journalists tried to tie him publicly to the Bond mythology, he would deflect with a courteous smile. "I was only doing my job," he would say, and that was the end of the conversation. His loyalty to discretion was absolute, even when it meant surrendering his place in history. By the time he passed away in 1988, the world he knew, the smoky intelligence offices, the post-war civility, the unspoken honor among spies had already vanished. His funeral was modest, attended by a few old colleagues who understood how much he had given and how little he had asked in return. No news headlines marked his death. No recognition from the intelligence service was made public. But inside locked MI5 archives, his name still appeared in faint typewriter ink, beside missions that had quietly altered the fate of nations. The real James Bond never had a theme song, nor a cinematic ending. His life faded like smoke, appropriate, perhaps, for a man who lived by vanishing. When the veil of secrecy finally lifted decades later, fragments of John Bingham's story began to reappear. Declassified MI5 records confirmed his brilliance, his quiet authority, and his unwavering sense of duty. Scholars and journalists rediscovered his influence on Ian Fleming, uncovering letters that hinted at their shared fascination with loyalty and deceit. Bingham's novels, long overshadowed by the glamour of Bond, began to find new readers who admired their authenticity. In his stories, espionage wasn't about explosions or seduction, it was about conscience, guilt, and the loneliness of those who lived in the dark for the sake of others. Critics started calling him the spy who made spying human again. And perhaps that is his true legacy, not in the sleek tuxedos or the shaken martinis, but in the moral questions he left behind. Even today, the shadow of John Bingham lingers wherever Bond appears on screen. Every smirk, every moment of cold resolve, every quiet pause before action traces of him live there. He never asked to be remembered. Yet history, in its own slow rhythm, found its way back to him. The man who taught Bond to lie had lived a life defined by truth, silent, unwavering, and unforgettable. Fame immortalized the fantasy of James Bond, but it was silence that defined John Bingham. While one man's name became a brand of desire and danger, the other's was buried under secrecy and time. Yet in the quiet contrast between them lies the truth about both. Bond was the illusion, and Bingham was the cost. He represented an England that no longer exists, disciplined, understated, built on promises, never spoken aloud. The silver screen glorified the thrill of espionage, but the real spy knew its weight, the solitude, the moral fatigue, the sacrifices that left no applause. Bingham's story is not one of tragedy, but of balance. He proved that honor could survive without recognition, and that the most faithful servants of history are often the least remembered. In the end, he did not need the world to see him. He had already shaped its vision of courage and then quietly walked away. What do you think does the man who inspired 007 deserve to step out from the shadows? John Bingham lived a life built on secrecy, loyalty, and silence, and yet, without him, The legend of James Bond might never have existed. If stories like this one move, use stories of the real lives hidden behind the myths, share your thoughts below, and let others see the truth beneath the light.